I've got my color piece, I've got it pretty close by so I can use it as a reference. You're going to want to keep looking back. You know, you're not, and I know you've probably done a lot of tattoos by this time. Don't try to follow it exact. You know, use your own artistic ability when you're doing this piece. You know, make it look like your own. You're going to see it's going to be very close to what's on here. But again, we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to work our way up through the tattoo. We're going to start with some of these little wind bars and stuff that need to be put in. And you'll see a lot of this stuff I'm not going to bring completely up to the stencil line. There's a lot of open spaces that you're going to have to leave on this piece. But where I'm starting on the end here, I'm not going to try to finish it with a real solid line on the end. I'm going to kind of fade it out. I'm using a 7 mag shader in here. And I've got my ink mixed. I've got one color cup that's solid black. I've got one that's got about 3 drips of black and it's diluted down. And then I've got one with just a single drip of black in it that I'm going to use for some real light shading when I get in and around the face. And you can see on these wind bars here, this is where we're going to go. We're going to shade those out. I want a softer look to the edge of those. I don't want them so solid black. This is probably the most important part of the tattoo is the shading. If it's not shaded right when you go to do your color work, it's not going to look good. Again, this is, and I'm using a straight black outline ink. You can use some of those heavier tribal inks. I just think you may have a little problem shading with some of those. You have to dilute them a little bit more to get a nice shade out of the piece. Now that you've got your stencil in, I mean, we're going to move around on this piece. We're not going to have to work strictly from the very bottom of it and work up. When we get to getting into all this detail up in here, I'll show you how you're going to move around. You're going to want to get all this black work done before you attempt any color in here at all. And again, you can see my machine's not spitting out ink all over the place. It's tuned down low. Put the colors in nice and solid. The black goes in nice and solid. You don't have to worry about wiping anymore because you got all your stencils all in there. Again, on this tattoo, unlike a lot of the other videos you probably saw, there's more watching to do on these than there is talking about it. And it's just to see something this size get done and what you can do. You're going to pick up a lot just by watching it. And you can see, I'm going to show you a big picture again. This is where I'm working from. I'm working all this bottom area in here. I try to get this black, heavy black stuff done and all in between here. What I was saying before when you were outlining, if you don't think you can get into some of these tight spots, you know, you could use your outliner for some of the real solid black little points. At this point, you should be pretty good with using those flat shaders. If you want to use a round on this, you could do that. A round shader would work. I think these mag shaders put the ink in faster, and you get a better flow with the piece. You can get some nicer shading and gradation in this than if you're using those round ones. The round shaders tend to just put it in a little bit too solid. You can feather out the ink a lot better with these with a mag shader. And a lot of this doesn't have an actual outline that I'm following. I'm going to kind of, on these wind bars where the solid black goes in, I've got some reference lines on here, but some I'm just going to, you're going to just do it by the look on the picture. Kind of pick a point where that it's going to start to fade into the actual piece here. So I'm just going to fade some of these lines in and out. If you're trying to get some of that softer shading in there when you're as you're working, if you leave the skin a little bit wet with the green soap and then you start to shade over it, you'll see the ink looks like it's blurring up and running, but you'll get it'll really soften it up real nice without having to go over it. It's almost like you're doing a wash right in the skin. And you'll get a nicer look. It'll be softer. You'll get some better gradation in there. It's not going to all be just real solid black. When I'm using this mag shader, I turn it, you know, I'm different angles you can use, just get into the points with it. So you can get pretty close to the edge of the piece that you're doing. I can get in and out of this mouth here pretty simply with this. I think that's why using a round shader on some of these bigger pieces, you're going to have a hard time getting in and out of some of the little gaps, you know, depending on the size of the piece. And make sure you're not using anything too small when you're doing a large piece of work. Make sure you're using a big enough needle with enough needles in it. You surely wouldn't want to be attempting something like this with a 5 or something like that. I mean, a 7 on this piece, as small as I go. You can probably go up to a 9 for some of the bigger stuff. But I think when it's when you're doing stuff where you got this kind of detail, you want to have a little bit more control. Now we got the mouth almost shaded in here. Everything's going to have some shade on it. You got to look at the picture real close, make sure you see almost every outline that you put in, you're going to shade off of somewhere to make it look more three-dimensional. You're not going to leave all this lip line going along in here. I mean, you could just color this part of the mouth, but it's going to look so much better if you cut back in with some black and be close to your outlines and shade around them. You know, much nicer look when a piece is done. You can see already just by putting in some of this shading. I'm going to wipe this off in a second so you can see it a little clear. how much of a difference it makes with the, once you got some of the shadows and the shades in. I'm gonna switch towels here and get a little spray so you can kind of see where we're at. This is what I'm talking about, shading around all the edges of the lines. It makes the piece look way better. I'm gonna look up in this face area now and you'll see. And I'm kind of mixing back and forth from, you know, I like right now this is a little bit more of the washed out ink that I'm using. This is like I said, it's about 3 drips in there. And in this face on the actual picture here, we want to create some of these lines in here. And we're going to create those lines without using an outline. This is where we didn't want outline. It's just kind of more or less just reference marks. So I'm going to create a line like right in here and a shadow. And these are the spots you don't want hard outlines in. So, you know, look at the piece real careful that you're going to do on somebody. And don't think that everywhere you're putting in black ink in a shade that you have to have an outline. That's not what you want. You want a softer look to it. You'll see right now when I'm just done with this little part here in the mouth, what this will look like by not having heavy outlines. See how it's starting to get more of a 3-dimensional look? And in here, everywhere off this nose, we're going to bring down wrinkles in the face. And this I'm doing, again, with a washed out black. Just keeping it real soft and light. When we put the color over this, it'll look really good. Watch when I do the nose on this piece here, you're going to see, again, there's no outline, there's no dark lines, but you're going to create your own, kind of figure where the shadow is on this nose, and I'll create a shadow line right from there. The ink that's laying on the skin, actually, you'll see how if I go over it, it'll make a real nice soft line. So now we've created a line right here without an outline being on it. And the same thing I'm going to do around the edge of this to give it some more dimension. You can see there's no outlines around here. But when we're done, it's going to look like we've got several layers. It's all going to be done just by shading it. So when you're, like I said, when you're doing these pieces, you got to look at them real good and see what you want shaded and what you don't. Some lines you want to leave out. You don't want them heavy lines. We're kind of doing the bags under the eyes of this. And again, there is no outline. I'm kind of mixing between a solid black and then that wash. I'm going to do up to around this eye area here, and then I'll show you how it's going to look. Then we'll do the other side. Now I'm going with just solid black for the eyeball. Even though there's going to be color on each side of that eye, you can go back in with a little bit of a wash. Again, create some dimension to the whole thing. More lines on the top. That off and show you about where we're at. So now you can see we've created all these lines underneath, and there was no outline there at all. But we created shadows and dips in the eye. I'll do the same thing coming down on this side. We'll just do that real quick, and then you'll see how it all looks when it's put together. When you get both sides done. Now these little lines that were in here, those were some reference lines that I had done in because it's going to be kind of black in there. I'm really covering right over those outlines. I'm going to pull that out like this, and we're going to create all these bags under the eye. this is a real washed out ink. I leave that ink sit on the skin like that, and just by going over it, it looks like you don't know where you're going here with it, but I do. I'm going to pull it right up close to that eyelid, and now you can see how it's starting to look real three-dimensional. I'm just going to put in this last eyeball here with the black. The same thing off the corner of the eye, just kind of wash it out, make it look more three-dimensional. I'm going to wipe this off. Spray it down. Now you can see, compared to this, you can see where all these dips and lines are all at. We've created all that without even doing anything with an outline. So now we're going to go back and we're going to finish up. I'm going to just keep moving along into this black shading here. I showed you on there those wind bars. How I'm going to do that. I'm going to go from solid black to a real soft gray shade on here. On the original picture, they were really black, and you got to remember sometimes it's just the way the color picture was printed. It might not be good. I'm just going to pull the shading out. This is where it gets a little tricky sometimes when you've got all this little detail in here and you're trying to shade. So you just got to kind of be careful you're not hitting your other pieces that you don't want shaded. Down to here, we're going to go with a little bit more solid black. And again, you're kind of creating your own lines on here where you're stopping the shading at. So you're going to kind of watch that same line all the way from the top to the bottom. So you can kind of see where we went. So we're bringing this bar coming all the way up, keeping that shade line on each side of each piece, and we're keeping it pretty nice and even all the way up. I'm going to try to finish that piece all the way down, see how that looks. I'm leaving the skin a little wet so that shade doesn't end with a hard line, it's nice and soft. I'm using pretty much a straight black here. I'm not using washed out ink because I'm trying to keep it pretty heavy on the edge of this line. If you find you're not getting a soft enough shade here, you can switch and use a washed out black to get that. I'm going to go back up in here now in the face, and that I was using a little bit more of a washed out. I got about 3 drips of black in here, and then I've got it diluted down. You can dilute it with either green salt or alcohol, depending on what the ink manufacturer says you can dilute your ink with. Again, this is another line that we left real thin, and that was left for a reason, so I could pull a heavy black line up to that and shade out of it. And all along the mouth here, the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to wipe this off now so you can kind of see where we're going. We're working all this face area here. Again, on these outlines, you can see, I'm gonna hold the sheet up. You can see where the color part comes in and all this black. That's what we're getting in right now. So we're creating a lot of our own lines on this. We're not following any particular line that's there. And a lot of it's done freehand, so you're getting an idea what I was talking about not having to put all those hard lines in. I don't think you could ever too much overshade this kind of a piece. I think this is something kind of your own preference on how you want it to look. You know, I'm trying to get a real 3-dimensional look to this. I think the original that we were looking at there is a little on the cartoony side, and I think by adding this black shading into the right spots, you can get a more realistic look. A lot better dimension out of the whole piece than it would be if you just kind of followed what they did there. You remember where the heavy color is going to go in. If you have heavy black near the color, it'll give it a good border. It'll have a real nice look to it. Again, a lot of these lines that you'll see where I'm shading, we're not there. I'm creating those lines. I'm gonna try to keep it wiped off a little more so you can see it a little better. Put these wind bars in here. Again, I'm leaving the skin a little wet for that softer look. A little bit of solid black around some of these little leaf designs. I'm not doing too much of a shade here. I'm doing more of just solid. So that's getting solid color in there. We'll move back up here. We'll get the rest of this face finished up, and where you get up to the back part of it, up in here where it's a little more gray shaded. Vaseline on there so my ink's not smearing up. Again, you can see I'm cutting in and out around all the design that we outlined in here. Make sure I got shading around every single piece on here. So I was talking about in that little skull piece, I'm gonna do some of this with this heavier, with this mag shader. And if you think you can't get into some of those small spots, you could do that with either a 7 round or something like that. So don't think you have to do the whole piece with one needle, because you can surely switch around if you're getting some smaller spots where you think you need to get in there. I'm gonna go back and finish these wind bars here. And this way you'll be able to see where I was doing that shading and how I was doing it, I think, a little clearer on here. Gonna get a nice soft shade on there. That's all we wanted to do, is want to just bring that black down enough to get a nice shade on it. And again, you can leave the skin, I'm going to show you, you can leave it a little wet like this. And then when you shade, you don't have to keep dipping in the ink. The ink that actually comes out of the end of the needle is going to work, and you're going to work that into the skin. You see, you get a nice softer shade like that. And we just keep moving on it like that. This is part of that leaf that's going to have some color in it, so we're going to keep it a little darker around the edge of that. And all these big spaces in here, they're going to have the shading done. Shading right up to the outline. If you have the shading in here a little light and it all heals up and you want to go back and darken any of this up, you can do that. You can always go a little darker later on if you have to, if you want to darken spots. But you're never going to be able to lighten it. So if you're not real sure if you wanted that dark in certain spots, then just go with a little bit of a lighter shade. You can always come back and get it a little darker in spots if you need to. These areas up in here around these waves and stuff, this is going to be a little more solid black. Work on some of that. Well, you'll be able to tell once you start getting your color in there where you put that real black stuff in. And if you think that's what I'm talking about, maybe darkening things up. You can even do it while you're doing your color. If you're looking at something and you go, well, I'm real close to some color and the shade's too light and you want to shade the color too, you may want to go back and darken the black, make the black a little blacker in spots. these areas here around these flames, I'm just going to pull some real light color out of here. Some real light shading around. I want some shading around just about every piece on here. All of these waves on this piece show just like a gray shaded cloud. I'm going to do one or two of those up in here to give you an idea of what you want to do on that, to get that look. Let's do one on here. And again, there's no outline on this, but what we're going to do is follow the edge of that. I'm going to keep the skin kind of wet, taking a little bit of a washed out black. I'm just going to kind of keep going over it like this, and it'll eventually pull in some shading. It'll look a little red, and that's because of the lack of ink that I'm using. I'm using more of a wash on this stuff here. But I'm letting that ink kind of just sit on the skin and using the ink that's laying on the skin. And it'll surely soften up that whole thing. It'll make it a real nice soft, when that's all healed up, it'll be a real soft gray shade. Wipe this off so you can see where we're at now. We've got the thing almost completely shaded in. Got a couple little more of those wind bars up in here. Start with the heavy black and just pull it out. I'm going to do the same thing on there's the two horns that are coming up, and again, those don't have any lines in them, just the basic outline. So we're going to take the black and just, I'm going to put in some lines right in there. I'm kind of doing it with the edge of the shader, just so it'll give that horn a little better appearance when it's all done. Make it look more three-dimensional. And then I'm going to do this last horn here. Just a couple of these waves and we're about there with the shading. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm just going to try to finish up some of this black. For the sake of the video, I'm not going to go with all this really heavy solid black on this picture for right now, because I want to show you, get into the color end of it, and we're going to show you how the whole thing's going to look when you start putting the color in next to this shading that I'm doing. Because every single piece on here is going to take some shading and some color, and I want to get to the heavy stuff so you can really see how the color is going to look on the face. Because we're pretty much complete down at the bottom of this piece. So that's it. So we'll finish off the black shading in here, the wind bars and some of the clouds, and just get those soft looks. But like I said before, the most important thing is just shading, you know, some of those shade lines that I did in here. again, we did without any outline at all. We did them completely with the shading tool. So, you know, that's the look you're looking for. Something real three-dimensional.